right, so you have to start. Okay, so today is October the 28th, and we're going to go over chapters 66, 67. This has to do with the Crusader kingdoms that developed after the First Crusade, and some of them are actually going to last for a little while. And also the Second and the Third Crusades. The Second Crusade is going to prove to be a disaster, but the Third Crusade is going to be kind of a stalemate. And that's despite the fact that about 2/3 of the Crusaders went home before the end of the war. So let's go ahead and see the images for today. So here I have the Latin kingdoms, otherwise known as the Crusader kingdoms that were developed after the First Crusade. Yeah, so we have the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the Principality of Armenia, Cilicia, and the County of Edessa. What you see here, this one's landlocked, so it was like definitely doomed to be the first to fall. And it was surrounded on almost all sides by hostile parties. So, as you saw in your reading, Edessa was the first to fall, and Jerusalem was the prize of all of this. Now, Antioch's going to last for quite some time. Armenia is going to last for a while too, but when it falls, the Armenia is going to actually remain. It actually has a very high Christian population. It's going to have a very high Christian population until the end of World War One. But then, of course, after the founding of Turkey, Turkish people are going to commit mass genocide on millions of Christians there. Let's see here. So here we have, this is supposed to be Godfrey. And so he's entering Jerusalem. And for some reason, he's chopping down a camel. I don't know why he's doing that. But I guess he had some things to do. This guy looks very upset about the whole matter. So besides camel chopping, he was also known as the King of Jerusalem. He was the protector of the Holy Sepulchre, which is like the place where Christ was buried and then was resurrected.
He didn't want to.
Right. And so you wanted to be humble. Yes, so as you may remember, their holy orders was something that was very big in both Eastern and Western Christianity. But in the Crusades, we're going to see it's going to be combined with knighthood or militarism. And of course, on the right, we have, and they're both wearing the Crusaders' cross, we have the Templars. The Templars are going to be around for quite some time. They're going to spread orders all throughout Europe. And as far as Crusaders go, they're actually going to be the ones who are going to integrate the most closely with the local Arabic and Muslim population. Many of them are going to speak Arabic, live close to, and even offer aid to just about all the people there, which is going to get them some suspicion from other Crusaders. They're also going to learn a few things from the Arabic people that they live with. And one of them is they're going to develop a system of checks and banking that they're going to bring to Europe. So they're going to be the first to actually kind of introduce this to Western civilization. And so it kind of makes sense, since they're supposed to protect pilgrims. What they would do is they would have castles inside of Europe and castles inside of the Holy Land. And so whenever a pilgrim wanted to go from Europe to the Holy Land on pilgrimage, it was very dangerous to travel with all their wealth. So what they did is they took some money and they brought it to one of the Templar castles in Europe. And so the Templar then would write a check for the pilgrim, and the pilgrim would bring that check and cash it in at one of the castles in the Holy Land ran by Templars. They're going to amass a great, vast amount of wealth from using this banking system, especially since they're the only ones doing it in that part of the world. And this is one of those things that's also going to have a lot of suspicion for them. In fact, they're going to be so rich that later on, the King of France in the 1200s is actually going to have them all annihilated. He's going to accuse them essentially of trying to overthrow the king on false charges, and he's going to take all the money for himself. And so that's going to be the end of the Templars. The Hospitallers are, in fact, there's still Hospitallers around today, though they're no longer like warrior monks. Most of them are people who take vows to help out the sick and the injured, and they do a lot of charity work. It's more of a big thing like for European Catholics over there. There are groups kind of like that here in America, known like as the Knights of Columbus. But yeah, it's mostly a charity organization type of church. And so, like other monks, they take vows of chastity. They're not supposed to get married. They're supposed to take vows of poverty. So the money goes to the organization. Things like that. But they don't take vows of nonviolence because they're supposed to be warriors too. All right, so this is Bernard. He is the guy who's going to make a big call for the Second Crusade because the Turks are going to be so successful in squashing these Crusader kingdoms. Your book's correct to say that they bring feudalism with them. And feudalism can be a fine thing whenever you're staving off bandits or if you're fighting other feudal lords. But whenever you're fighting a very large, well-organized military, it really stinks. And that's what they came across. So a lot of the Holy Land the Crusaders took was taken back. Saladin, he's going to be a very powerful Muslim ruler during his time. He's known to be a very well-educated man, a brilliant general, and he was known to be into the arts, a very pious fellow, and he's going to be very successful in taking back a lot of the Crusader lands. And this is going to spike the Third Crusade, in which we read a bit about. In the Third Crusade, you're going to have three separate kingdoms. You're going to have France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire is going to band together to take back this land. It was actually a very large army. It looked like they were going to be successful, but they had some problems. This is the Battle of Acre, right? So at Acre, Saladin is going to be very good at siegecraft. That's smashing walls, getting your troops over, and taking cities. Let me show you the map real quick. Show you how you can see. Here it is, right here. It's in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. So Saladin is going to take back the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Edessa's already been smashed. And so this is all the Crusader kingdoms are going to have left. So back to here. And so one of the leaders, Barbarossa, he's going to decide to take his German troops through land. And according to this medieval artist, he died drowning. We do know that the accounts are that he drowned, but from the accounts we have, it actually sounds like he died of a heart attack and then he fell off his horse and drowned. So it's like the story goes, he was going across the river and he grabbed his arm. He said his arm hurt. And usually like severe left side pain is a sign of a heart attack. And then he fell off his horse and his arm hurt and they couldn't get him out in time. So here's a more tasteful picture of it. So this is obviously like a much later painting. What's Barbarossa mean in Latin? Barbarossa is red, and Barba is beard, red beard. So Frederick Redbeard. So yeah, we kind of skipped over some of his life in some of those chapters we went over. Barbarossa was very famous for conquering about half of Italy. Italians despised this man because he would pretty much come take their cities and bleed all their wealth and go back home. But he's going to spend his 70s dying in the Crusades. So there you have it. He was known as being a pretty stubborn guy, led a pretty rough life, so it's not surprising he had a heart attack. However, somebody known for being much more noble was King Richard I of England, the Lionheart. He was known to exemplify a lot of those knightly virtues that we talked about with chivalry. So he was a very well-mannered Christian king. and he was also a very good leader in battle. So despite having overwhelmed force or outnumbered forces with little supplies, he was actually very successful against Saladin. But unfortunately, because he had lost the German troops because Frederick died, most of them went home, and then he lost the French troops because King Philip didn't like having to share authority of the war with another king. King's kind of like me, number one, surprisingly enough. He's going to still be rather successful, but he's not going to have enough supplies and replacement manpower to push the Crusades any further. So he makes a treaty with Saladin to allow pilgrims to be safe. And they're also going to agree to make boundaries with the remaining Crusader kingdoms and, of course, the Islamic territory. And they're going to promise peace. Of course, we know there's going to be more crusades, so that's not going to last forever. Don't worry. What about all this else? I forgot. But hey, guys, we'll go back to Richard. So, Third Crusade is kind of a stalemate. Let's go ahead and get our notes for the day, you kids. All right. So, Crusading happened. Can somebody tell me a little bit about the Crusader kingdoms? It's from chapter 66.
They were very well maintained because the Crusaders turned themselves into a military religious.
Crusader kingdoms?
Yeah. Are we talking about Antioch?
Yeah. Okay. Okay, we could say that. But how were they run? What were they run like? Well, first they created after. I'm not going to disagree. Now, it kind of depended because a couple of the Crusader kingdoms were very well maintained, but a couple of them were actually pretty brutal to the locals who were there. They looked down on them as outsiders and stuff like that. So even some of the Christians that were there, they saw them as people who sided with the enemy in the past and stuff like that. So created after the First Crusade. But what I'm asking is, what kind of government did these places have? Feudalism. Yeah. So, not feudal. So feudal style government. So they made them into little fiefs. And what were the Crusader kingdoms? What was their names? You mentioned Antioch.
Tripoli, Antioch, Tripoli.
Yeah, Antioch, Tripoli.
Edessa.
Yeah. Edessa, the kingdom, and the kingdom of Jerusalem. So very good. Yeah, it kind of depended on where you were because some of these places, you got to remember they frowned upon. Now, over time, a couple of them will become much more integrated into the societies that they're around. But at first, things were a little rough. They were treated as a conquered people. Being the first generation of people who've been conquered isn't always that great. But eventually, over time, as we've seen, with say the Normans and stuff, things chill out. All right. So very good, very good. Now, this one we read a little bit about. So, what were the hospitallers?
They took care of sick people.
Yeah. So, cared for the sick. What were they?
They were knights.
Knights and what?
Crusaders.
Crusaders. Crusading warrior monks. Don't worry, they weren't Kung Fu Pandas though. But the thing is, what a lot of people don't know is that a lot of monks in Europe actually did practice in their time the martial arts they had, which were pretty much just wrestling. So a lot of them did do Greco-Roman wrestling. if you ever watch MMA, you'll realize that it's actually pretty effective. So cared for the sick, crusading warrior monks. Okay. Now, what about the Templars? What set them apart to make them a little distinct and different?
And they established branches. in Europe.
Okay. So, held lands in Europe, lands and, yeah, we're saying branches, so like members. But what were they again?
Um,
They were also
hospital.
crusading warrior monks.
Yeah.
There we go. So they were also crusading warrior monks. But what was their main job? So these guys' main job was to care for the sick, especially sick pilgrims. These guys, their job was mostly to. So what? Fight, yeah. So they were more of the warrior type, but theirs was actually mostly to protect pilgrims and the Holy Land. So they were more defensive. So both of them, however, were not supposed to necessarily be weak. Though they did go on offensive, their initial aim was not to go on defensive or offensive warfare. It was mostly to hold ground where you have it, protect pilgrims, care for pilgrims, set up kind of like a system and stuff like that. So it could carry on. Now, however, we're moving on to the Second Crusade. So, yes, sir.
It started because Muslims took Edessa.
Yes, you're right. So, again, now remember the only crusade that I'm really having you memorize the date for is the beginning of the First Crusade. So don't forget that. Began due to Muslims conquering Edessa. They're like, wait a second. They took back the Crusader kingdom we established. So we have to go back and defend because they saw this as like an offensive that would gain more ground, which it did. How did it turn out?
Terrible.
Yeah. Crusaders defeated pretty much. After simply a few battles. And a lot of this had to do with, just like a lot of the problems with the Crusaders, they're so disunified because of feudalism. They're all like confederates. They're small groups of people who agree to fight with one another on the same side, but they don't even agree on common leadership or common objectives. And that's very disastrous for them. All right, so next one, Saladin. Who is that guy?
So like he was like, y'all can't do that. So he like took over Jerusalem again.
Yes. So Muslim leader. Who?
Like he was very powerful and Christians would like fear him.
Yeah.
He's really powerful. And like he like stopped the tide of European conquest.
Yes. And took Jerusalem and led the halt of the Crusaders. Yeah, so they're not going to go any further ever again. And he's widely accepted as like a big hero. to like Arabic people today, kind of like Richard Lionheart is to like patriotic English people. You know, to high regard to patriotic English people today. So good stuff, good stuff. And actually, they're Saladin and Richard the First. They're going to have like mutual understanding. They actually walk away liking each other, right? But of course, each of they're enemies, which says a lot. It's very important to respect your enemy, because if you don't respect your enemy, then you don't think that they're capable of things, and then they get the advantage of you and stuff. So they're both very wise leaders. All right, so the Third Crusade. Third Crusade starts because of
People heard of Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
They were angry, and they're like, let's take it back.
Yes. So the Crusaders wanted Jerusalem back. They're like, hey, the holy city. So they wanted Jerusalem back. So what three kingdoms came?
France, England, and
Germany.
Germany.
Yeah, led by France, England, and Germany. And so Richard Lionheart's going to take over. And what does he do? He's going to
Peace treaty?
he's going to lead peace treaty. So yeah, Richard the Lionheart defeats Saladin. And makes a peace treaty. I don't remember its name, I'm sorry. And this peace treaty is going to signify equal, so the Crusaders don't get back Jerusalem, but they at least get back the old pilgrim rights that they had way back before the Turks. So when you think about it, what got the First Crusade started in the first place, Richard Lionheart fixed it. But we're going to see that because of the existence of the Crusader kingdoms, that's going to lead to further warfare. So like, hey, we took ground. We can't just give it up. That's a common thing you see in countries even today. So the war starts for one reason, but it's going to become something else. It's going to become a bit of something else. I get a fancy picture of this, so I can post it. But yeah, if you're an online student, please keep in mind the chapters we go over, you're supposed to read to. So just make sure you do that. It's kind of like a friendly little reminder. There you go. I tried to keep it all like visible over here. So, all right. So, wait, before I turn this off, let me point out the chapters real quick, because tomorrow we're going to have our little Quizlet quiz, and it's going to be almost 30 terms, almost. And so, we'll definitely post it on the Google Classroom. So, get it set back up to where it needs to go. Let's see. All right. And my Quizlet, which is titled E. Whitener 80. And our chapters are 40 to 43, 44 to 48, 49 to 53. And so that comes up to 10, 25, 34 total terms. Not too bad. So make sure you study for that. I'm going to post that during class time tomorrow. And I'll see you later. No lecture tomorrow either, though. So just do the quiz. I have a little reading assignment for you, but I'm not going to have you write a paper, but I do expect you to read it. So see you on Friday.